In the heartland of America, where the sky stretched wide and the corn grew tall, lay the quiet farming community of Willow Creek. It was a place where traditions ran deep, and the rhythm of life was set by the seasons and the land. Into this established world, in the early years of the last century, arrived Elias Petrov. He was a man of few words, with hands calloused by years of labor and eyes that held the quiet wisdom of someone who had seen much. Elias was an outsider, an immigrant who had journeyed far to find a patch of earth he could call his own. He purchased a modest farmstead on the outskirts of town, a place with a small, weather-beaten house and a few acres of fertile soil. The people of Willow Creek were, for the most part, welcoming, though cautious. They observed Elias and his family, his wife, Anna, and their young son, Mikhail, with a gentle curiosity. The Petrovs worked hard, quietly tending their fields, and seemed to want little more than to be left to their own devices. But as the first spring rains gave way to the humid, unpredictable days of summer, Elias began to do something that puzzled and then amused his new neighbors. He started digging, not a well, though that was the first assumption, nor a new foundation for a barn. This hole was different. It was wide and deep, situated just a stone's throw from his small farmhouse. Day after day, after the sun had dipped below the horizon and most farmers were resting from their labors, the faint sound of a shovel striking earth would carry across the fields. Elias and Anna, sometimes with young Mikhail helping to carry smaller loads, would labor tirelessly, slowly excavating a massive pit in their backyard. A growing mound of dark, rich soil began to rise beside it, a silent testament to their relentless effort. The whispers began subtly, carried on the breeze from one farm to another, discussed in hushed tones at the general store. "What in the world is Petrov doing?" old Mr. Abernathy would ponder, stroking his chin. "Digging for buried treasure, perhaps," a younger farmer would joke, eliciting a round of chuckles. The common consensus formed quickly. Elias Petrov was wasting his time, his strength, and good land on a project no one understood. You see, in Willow Creek, people built their homes on the surface, or at most had a shallow root cellar for storing preserves. The idea of deliberately carving out a deep subterranean space, separate from any practical farming need, was alien. They lived with the weather. They endured it. When the sky turned green and the wind began to howl, they'd head to their basements, often little more than damp holes under the house, or simply huddle together in their living rooms, hoping for the best. It was the way things had always been. But Elias had seen the power of the wind in other lands, heard stories of structures torn apart as if they were made of paper. He understood a simple, undeniable truth about protection. The deeper you went, the more the earth itself became your shield. The ground, with its immense weight and stability, offered a kind of resistance that no above-ground structure, no matter how sturdy, could truly match against the raw, untamed fury of a great storm. He didn't speak of this principle. He simply acted upon it. The digging became a public spectacle, even if only from a distance. Folks driving by would slow their wagons, craning their necks to gaze at the ever-growing excavation. It was becoming clear this was no ordinary hole. It was too precisely shaped, too consistently deep for a simple ditch. It was a commitment, a grand, inexplicable undertaking. And with each shovelful of earth removed, the Petrov family made a clear sacrifice. Their evenings, once for quiet rest or community gatherings, were now consumed by this arduous labor. Their hands became raw, their backs ached, and the fatigue etched itself onto their faces. They missed the Sunday socials, the occasional barn raisings, further cementing their status as the peculiar outsiders. "They're spending all their good time digging," Mrs. Abernathy would cluck, shaking her head. "Time that could be spent on their crops or simply enjoying the quiet of the evening." The initial amusement slowly morphed into a kind of pity, laced with a touch of condescension. "Poor Petrov," people would say. "He must have a screw loose. What in heaven's name does he think he's building down there?" Children, emboldened by their parents' whispers, would sometimes point and giggle as they rode past, calling out, "Mr. Petrov's digging to China." Elias and Anna never responded to the jests, never offered an explanation. They simply continued their silent, back-breaking work. The hole grew wider, deeper, a gaping maw in their backyard that seemed to swallow their time, their energy, and the community's understanding. It was an act so profoundly out of step with the norms of Willow Creek that it could only be seen as folly, a grand and utterly absurd endeavor. And as the summer days grew longer and the first distant rumbles of seasonal thunderstorms began to echo across the plains, the hole in Elias Petrov's backyard became a monument to his quiet, stubborn, and utterly baffling conviction. As the weeks turned into months, Elias Petrov's project evolved from a simple hole in the ground into something far more elaborate. He wasn't just digging, he was building. After reaching a depth of nearly 15 feet, he began to shore up the walls. First, with rough-hewn timbers he'd painstakingly cut and hauled from a distant woodlot. Then with stones gathered from his own fields and purchased from a nearby quarry. The sheer effort was staggering. Each stone, each beam, had to be lowered into the deepening pit, then meticulously fitted into place. Anna worked alongside him, mixing mortar from lime and sand, her small frame surprisingly strong as she helped Elias hoist and position the heavy materials. Young Mikhail, though still small, would carry water and smaller stones, his eyes wide with a mixture of childlike wonder and the serious understanding that this was profoundly important to his father. The structure began to take shape, a single, sturdy room, roughly 10 feet by 12, with thick walls designed to resist immense pressure. The entrance was a narrow shaft, also reinforced, leading down from a small, inconspicuous trapdoor near the farmhouse. Elias planned to cap the entire structure with a thick layer of earth, burying it completely beneath the surface. He wasn't just building a cellar, he was constructing a subterranean refuge, a chamber deliberately isolated from the world above. The community's reaction intensified. Old man Hemlock, the town's most respected carpenter, would shake his head gravely. "Petrov's building a tomb, not a shelter," he'd declare at the general store, his voice thick with concern. "No good can come of such a dark, damp place." The local banker, Mr. Henderson, a man whose opinions carried significant weight, even paid Elias a visit. He stood at the edge of the pit, peering down at the laborious work, his brow furrowed. "Mr. Petrov," he began, his tone a mix of politeness and barely concealed exasperation, "are you certain this is a wise use of your resources? The cost of these materials, the time spent, it's a considerable investment for something so unconventional." Elias, as was his way, simply offered a polite nod and continued to mix another batch of mortar. He didn't explain, he didn't argue, he just worked, but his silence only fueled the speculation and the ridicule. The whispers grew louder, bolder. "He's mad," some declared openly, "lost his mind with all that digging." Others, more charitable, believed he was simply misguided, a foreigner who didn't understand the ways of Willow Creek. "Our basements have always been enough," they'd say. "Why does he need to bury himself like a badger?" The physical principle Elias understood, though he lacked the words to articulate it in a way his neighbors would grasp, was deceptively simple. Mass equals protection. He knew that the greatest danger from a powerful windstorm, particularly a tornado, wasn't just the direct force of the wind, but the incredible changes in air pressure. A tornado creates a partial vacuum, causing structures to explode outwards as the higher pressure inside tries to equalize with the lower pressure outside. Above ground, even the strongest walls could buckle under such forces. But underground, it was different. The immense weight of the earth itself, hundreds of tons of soil packed tightly around the bunker, would act as an unyielding buffer. This massive, static pressure would counteract the violent pressure drops of a storm, preventing the explosion effect. Furthermore, the ground provided an incredible barrier against flying debris, the greatest killer in many storms. A piece of wood or metal, traveling at incredible speeds, could pierce an above-ground wall, but it would be utterly stopped by 10 or 15 feet of compacted earth. Elias wasn't trying to outmuscle the wind. He was using the planet itself as his shield. He was building into the earth, not on it. This undertaking came at a significant cost. The Petrovs were not wealthy. Every sack of cement, every load of stone, every timber represented money that could have been spent on better tools for the farm, on new clothes for Mikhail, or simply put aside for lean times. Enna would mend their worn garments over and over, and their meals, though nourishing, were always simple. Their small plot of land, while producing enough to sustain them, wasn't yielding its full potential, because Elias's evenings and weekends were consumed by the bunker, not by improving his fields or repairing fences. Their social isolation deepened, invitations to community events dwindled. People began to avoid eye contact, unsure how to respond to the man who was so stubbornly, so obviously wrong. Mikhail, at school, faced the brunt of it. Other children would tease him, calling his father the mole man, or asking if he lived in a cave. Anna, though strong, sometimes felt the weight of their isolation, the quiet judgment in the eyes of the other women at market. Yet, she never wavered in her support for Elias. She saw the quiet determination in his eyes, felt the deep conviction in his touch, and trusted his unspoken wisdom. As the spring turned fully to summer, the air grew heavy and still, then often broke with violent, sudden thunderstorms. These were just precursors, a teasing taste of the season to come. The local newspapers began to carry warnings, their headlines speaking of tornado watches and severe weather advisories. The people of Willow Creek knew what this meant. It was tornado season, and in Elias Petrov's backyard, hidden beneath a fresh layer of sod, lay his silent, absurd, and finally completed fortress. The trapdoor was barely visible, a small square shadow in the grass, waiting for the sky to rage, waiting for the earth to tremble, waiting to prove or perhaps disprove the quiet conviction of a man who dared to dig a hole where no one else saw the need. The summer of that year settled over Willow Creek like a heavy blanket, thick with humidity and the constant low thrum of cicadas. But beneath the surface of lazy afternoons and ripening crops, an unspoken tension grew. The local almanacs, consulted with almost religious fervor, predicted a severe tornado season. Farmers, seasoned by years of unpredictable weather, watched the skies with a practiced eye, noting the peculiar cloud formations, the sudden shifts in wind, and the oppressive stillness that often preceded a violent outburst. The talk at the feed store wasn't just about crop prices anymore. It was about reinforced storm cellars, about the quickest route to the basement, about the deep primal fear of the twisting funnel cloud. Elias Petrov's bunker was now complete, a silent, earthen mound, indistinguishable from any other rise in the ground, save for the small, carefully camouflaged wooden trap-door. It was utterly unassuming, a hidden space beneath the mundane surface of his backyard. To the casual observer, the digging had simply stopped, the dirt had been smoothed over, and the peculiar project was apparently abandoned, or perhaps forgotten, a testament to a foreigner's strange whims. This completion, however, didn't bring an end to the community's judgment. If anything, it solidified it. He spent all that money, all that time, just to bury a hole, Mr. Abernathy mused, shaking his head. What good is a hole in the ground when the wind rips your house apart? The general sentiment was that Elias had not only wasted his resources, but had also proven himself truly out of touch with practical farming life. He had built nothing visible, nothing productive, nothing that offered immediate tangible benefit. He had simply disappeared a great deal of effort and material beneath the soil. The Petrovs continued their quiet existence, bearing the weight of unspoken criticism, and the occasional outright jest. Anna would feel the sting of it when buying flour, noticing the averted gazes or the quick, pitying smiles. Mikhail, now old enough to fully understand the ridicule, would sometimes come home from school with a downcast face, asking his mother why his father had to be so different. But Elias remained steadfast. His sacrifice was real and ongoing. The family's meager savings had been poured into the bunker's construction. There were no new clothes, no small luxuries. Their reputation in Willow Creek, once merely unknown, was now firmly established as peculiar, even foolish. Yet in Elias's eyes there was no regret, only a quiet, unshakable certainty. He knew what others did not fully grasp. The earth above their bunker wasn't just dirt, it was a colossal shield. A typical farm basement, though better than nothing, was still vulnerable. Its walls were often thin, its ceiling the floor joists of the house above. A direct hit from a powerful tornado could collapse it, or the immense pressure differential could still tear it apart. But Elias's bunker, buried deep, was different. He had calculated, in his own way, the sheer weight of the earth above and around it. Hundreds of thousands of pounds of soil. This mass wasn't just a physical barrier. It was a constant, stabilizing force. When the external atmospheric pressure plummeted during a tornado, the ground pressure, the immense weight of the earth, would prevent the internal structure from being sucked out or collapsing inwards. It was a fortress designed to withstand the unquantifiable raw power of nature by becoming a part of nature itself. Then came the day. The air, usually humid and heavy, became unnaturally still, almost suffocating. The sky, which had been a brilliant summer blue, began to darken rapidly, shifting through shades of bruised purple to an eerie, sickly green. A strange, metallic taste seemed to hang in the air. Distant rumbles, not of thunder but of something deeper, more guttural, began to vibrate through the ground. Farmers rushed to secure their livestock, their eyes wide with a familiar dread. Radios crackled with urgent warnings. A severe tornado watch had been issued for Willow Creek and the surrounding counties. As evening approached, the sky truly began to rage. Lightning forked across the horizon, illuminating monstrous, swirling clouds. The wind, at first a gentle sigh, quickly escalated to a furious roar, bending trees and rattling windows. Hail, the size of marbles, then walnuts, began to pelt the rooftops. The power flickered, then died, plunging homes into darkness. Panic began to ripple through the town. Families huddled in their basements, clutching loved ones, listening to the terrifying symphony of the storm building outside. At the Petrov farm, Elias moved with a calm, deliberate purpose. Anna, her face pale but resolute, gathered a small oil lamp, a jug of water and a few blankets. Mikhail, his young eyes reflecting the fear he saw in the sky, clung to his mother's skirt. Elias took his son's hand, his grip firm and reassuring. They walked out into the swirling wind and pelting rain, towards the barely visible trapdoor in the backyard. The wind howled around them, snatching at their clothes, but they pressed on. With a grunt, Elias lifted the heavy wooden door, revealing the dark, narrow shaft descending into the earth. The roar of the storm was already deafening, a monstrous, hungry sound. He guided Anna and Mikhail down the ladder, then followed, pulling the heavy door shut behind him with a final echoing thud. Above them, the world was dissolving into chaos. The house itself groaned under the assault, timbers straining, glass shattering. But below, in the silent earthen chamber, the Petrov family waited, suspended between the fury above and the quiet certainty of the earth around them. The true test had begun. As Elias pulled the heavy trapdoor shut, plunging the bunker into near-total darkness, the world above them erupted into an unimaginable fury. The first thing that struck them was the sudden, profound silence. The deafening roar of the wind and rain, which had moments before assaulted their ears, was instantly reduced to a distant, guttural rumble, a low vibration that seemed to travel through the very earth beneath their feet. Anna lit the oil lamp, its soft glow casting dancing shadows on the rough-hewn stone walls. Mikhail, his small hand still clutching his father's, looked around the small, secure space, his initial terror slowly giving way to a bewildered calm. The bunker was small, perhaps 10 feet by 12, with a low, arched ceiling that felt immensely strong. The air was cool and still, carrying the faint scent of damp earth and stone. Elias had built a simple wooden bench along one wall, and they sat close together, the three of them, a small island of warmth and light in the vast, subterranean darkness. Above them, the storm raged with a ferocity Willow Creek had rarely witnessed. They could feel it rather than hear it directly. A deep, resonant tremor shook the entire structure as if a giant fist was pounding on the ground above. The air pressure within the bunker seemed to shift subtly, a faint popping in their ears, but the thick earthen walls held firm, an unyielding bulwark against the atmospheric maelstrom. There were moments when the vibrations intensified, a grinding, tearing sound that suggested immense objects being ripped apart and hurled through the air. Elias imagined the trees outside, the small barn, perhaps even their own farmhouse, succumbing to the wind's merciless embrace. He squeezed Anna's hand, then Mikhail's, his face a mask of quiet determination. The worst of it lasted perhaps 20 minutes. An eternity when every second felt like a lifetime. The ground shuddered violently, then less so. The deep roar began to recede, becoming a mournful howl, then a distant whine, until finally only the steady drumming of rain remained, a gentle counterpoint to the thumping of their own hearts. The stillness that followed was almost as unnerving as the storm itself. It was the silence of utter devastation. They waited for a long time, listening, straining to hear anything from above. Elias checked his pocket watch. Nearly an hour had passed since they descended. He knew it was dangerous to emerge too soon, but the fear for what awaited them, for their home, for their neighbors, was a heavy burden. Finally, with a deep breath, he climbed the ladder, pushing against the heavy trapdoor. It resisted, held down by debris. He pushed harder, grunting with effort, until with a scraping sound it yielded. A rush of cool, damp air filled the bunker, carrying with it the scent of wet earth, splintered wood, and something else, a raw, wild smell of chaos. Elias poked his head out first. The world above was transformed. The familiar landscape of their farm was gone, replaced by a scene of utter destruction. Their small farmhouse, once a sturdy presence, was now a fractured skeleton of timbers, its roof completely ripped away, walls collapsed inward. The barn was a heap of unrecognizable rubble. Trees were either snapped in half or uprooted, lying like fallen giants. The sun was just beginning to peek through the retreating storm clouds, casting a surreal, golden light on the devastation. It illuminated a path of destruction that stretched as far as the eye could see, a wide, brutal scar carved across the heart of Willow Creek. As news slowly spread the next morning, carried by dazed survivors walking through the debris, the true extent of the catastrophe became horrifyingly clear. The tornado, later classified as one of the most powerful to ever strike the region, had cut a swath of destruction directly through the town. Homes were flattened, businesses shattered, and beloved landmarks reduced to splinters. Many of the traditional basements, which the community had always relied upon, had proven tragically inadequate. Mr. Abernathy's house, sturdy and well-kept, was gone. His cellar, though it had saved him and his wife, was partially collapsed, its wooden ceilings splintered by falling debris from the house above. The town hall, with its reinforced basement, had suffered a direct hit, and while the structure held, the sheer force of the wind had ripped away the upper stories, leaving the shelter exposed and vulnerable. Even the bank, with its reputedly strong foundation, was a wreck, its vault exposed to the elements. People spoke in hushed tones of neighbors who had sought refuge in what they thought were safe places, only to find them compromised by flying debris or the sheer imploding force of the wind. The traditional solutions, the basements and root cellars, had offered some protection, but many were damaged, leaving those within shaken, injured, and exposed to the elements after the storm passed. The community, battered and reeling, began the grim task of searching for survivors, of accounting for the missing. Amidst the chaos and the heartbreaking discoveries, a new worry began to circulate. No one had seen the Petrovs. Their farm, situated directly in the tornado's path, was a scene of total annihilation. The farmhouse, the barn, everything above ground was utterly destroyed. And everyone remembered the strange, absurd hole Elias Petrov had dug in his backyard, the one they had all ridiculed. With the devastation so widespread, so absolute, what chance could a family possibly have, especially one who had put all their faith in something so unconventional, so utterly foolish? A chilling silence fell over those who remembered the bunker, a fear that the Petrovs' folly had cost them everything. When Elias finally managed to push open the trapdoor, the world that greeted them was one of stark, bewildering silence. The air, though still, was thick with the scent of damp earth and shattered timber. The sun, now fully emerged, cast long, eerie shadows across a landscape utterly transformed. Their small farmhouse, the barn, the sturdy oak tree that had stood for generations, all were gone, reduced to a jumbled, splintered mess. Yet from the depths of their earthen sanctuary, the Petrov family emerged unharmed, their faces pale but their bodies whole, a testament to the quiet strength of their hidden refuge. Anna gasped, her hand flying to her mouth as she surveyed the devastation. Mikhail, clinging to Elias's leg, whimpered at the sight. But Elias, with a steadying hand on his wife's shoulder, simply looked out at the wreckage. Their world above ground was annihilated, but they were alive. They were dry. They were safe. The bunker, a dark, unassuming hole in the ground, had held fast. They were the first to stir in their immediate vicinity. Elias, after ensuring Anna and Mikhail were settled on a relatively clear patch of ground, began to walk towards where his road used to be, hoping to find help, to find answers. It wasn't long before a small group of dazed survivors, making their way through the debris-strewn fields, spotted them. It was Old Man Hemlock and Mr. Henderson, their clothes torn, their faces streaked with dirt and exhaustion. They had managed to escape their own damaged homes, seeking out any sign of life. Their eyes, wide with disbelief, fell upon Elias, Anna, and Mikhail, standing amidst the ruins of their farm. But then their gaze shifted to the small, square trapdoor, still partially open, nestled in the ground where the Petrovs' backyard used to be. The contrast was impossible to ignore. Everything else was a testament to nature's destructive power. Only that small, inconspicuous opening hinted at an untouched interior. "Petrov!" Old Man Hemlock rasped, his voice hoarse. How are you?" He looked from the family to the gaping wound in the earth, then back again. Elias simply gestured towards the bunker. "We were inside." The news spread like wildfire through the traumatized community. As rescue efforts slowly got underway and the full extent of the tornado's devastation became clear, the story of the Petrov survival became a beacon, a point of bewildered fascination. Entire homes had vanished. Basements had collapsed. But the Petrovs, the ridiculed outsiders, had emerged from their mole hole completely unscathed. A few days later, after the initial shock had begun to subside, a small delegation of townsfolk, including Mr. Henderson and Old Man Hemlock, visited the Petrov farm. They stood in stunned silence before the ruin of the house, then walked to the bunker. Elias, with quiet dignity, opened the trapdoor and invited them down. The contrast was immediate and profound. As they descended the ladder, leaving the chaos and the lingering smell of destruction above, they entered a space of pristine calm. The air was cool and still. The oil lamp, still sitting on the wooden bench, was exactly where Anna had left it. A blanket lay folded neatly. There was no dust, no debris, no sign that a monstrous storm had just ripped apart the world directly above it. The thick stone walls and packed earth ceiling were utterly intact, unyielding. The silence was absolute, a stark, almost sacred counterpoint to the memory of the tornado's roar. Mr. Henderson, usually so composed, ran a hand over the smooth stone wall, then looked at Elias, his eyes wide with a mixture of awe and profound regret. "Mr. Petrov," he said, his voice barely a whisper, we were wrong. Terribly wrong." He didn't offer a lengthy apology, nor did Elias expect one. The simple admission from the town's most respected figure was more than enough. Old man Hemlock, who had openly mocked the project, simply nodded slowly, his gaze fixed on the sturdy construction. He understood now the principle Elias had instinctively grasped. The earth itself was the ultimate shield. The sheer weight and stability of the surrounding ground had absorbed the shock, stabilized the pressure, and deflected the debris, making the bunker an unbreachable fortress. In the months that followed, as Willow Creek slowly began the arduous process of rebuilding, the story of the Petrov bunker became a legend. People started to understand. They saw the tangible proof, the Petrov family, alive and whole, while others had suffered immense loss. The simple physical principle of deep, earth-sheltered protection, once dismissed as folly, was now seen as undeniable wisdom. Farmers, many of whom had lost their homes and had to rebuild from scratch, began to dig. Not just shallow cellars, but true bunkers, deeper and more robust, following the principles Elias had demonstrated. They didn't have Elias's exact plans, but they understood the core idea: bury it deep, make it strong, let the earth do the work. The Petrov bunker became a common phrase, a model for survival. Elias, true to his nature, never sought praise or recognition. He simply continued to farm his land, rebuilding his life with quiet resolve, occasionally offering a helpful nod or a few words of advice to neighbors who now approached him with deference rather than ridicule. The episode in Willow Creek served as a powerful, if tragic, reminder. Sometimes the most profound wisdom doesn't come from established norms or popular opinion. Sometimes it comes from the quiet conviction of an outsider, a man who sees a simple truth that everyone else overlooks. He built not on fear, but on a fundamental understanding of the physical world, a knowledge that the earth, when properly engaged, could offer a sanctuary against even the most violent forces of nature. His was a story of silent conviction, of sacrifice, and of the ultimate vindication that only reality in its rawest form can deliver. The man they called mad, the man who dug a hole in his backyard, had been right all along, and in his quiet certainty he had taught Willow Creek a lesson it would never forget.